For almost 4,000 years, they were the tallest structures on Earth. The Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, the Burj Khalifa, all of them are newcomers in the shadow of these monuments. They are the sole surviving wonder of the ancient world, the only legacy of that original list of 7 marvels that still stands today. And for most of recorded history, they have been shrouded in a fog of myth, speculation, and outright fantasy. We are, of course, talking about the pyramids of Egypt. But let's be honest with ourselves for a moment. When you picture the construction of the pyramids, what do you see? Do you see thousands of emaciated slaves, chained together, being whipped by cruel overseers as they drag massive stones across the desert? Do you see elongated, gray aliens with large black eyes, beaming stones into place with the power of thought? Do you see Atlanteans using crystals to levitate granite beams? Or do you see a forgotten race of giants who once roamed the earth? We've all absorbed these images from movies, television, and fringe history books. The narrative is seductive because it makes us feel special. It suggests that the past was either impossibly brutal or impossibly magical, and that we, in our modern age, are either the enlightened liberators from that brutality or the sad inheritors of a world that has lost its magic. But what if I told you that the truth is far more impressive than any of these fantasies? What if the real story isn't about aliens or magic, but about the sheer, breathtaking, almost terrifying genius of humanity at its most ambitious? What if the men who built the pyramids were not slaves, and not wizards, but something far more interesting, engineers, organizers, and laborers who achieved what we, with all our computers and cranes, would struggle to replicate today? Welcome. This is the definitive guide on how the pyramids of Egypt were built. We are leaving the myths, the Hollywood epics, and the ancient astronaut theorists at the door. We are going to strap on our reed sandals, grab our copper chisels, and travel back over 4,500 years. We are going to walk the quarries, sail the Nile, and climb the ramps to uncover the real-world engineering, the staggering logistics, and the incredible human spirit that moved mountains literally. This is the story of the ultimate ancient construction project. And it begins not with a bang, but with a burial. To understand the Great Pyramid of Giza, you have to forget everything you know about death. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end. It was a transition. It was a journey. They believed that a person was composed of several parts: the physical body, the name, the shadow, the soul, or Ba, and the spirit, or Ka. For a person to live forever in the field of reeds, a perfect mirror of Egypt, all of these parts had to be preserved. The body had to be recognizable, hence mummification. The name had to be spoken. And the spirit needed a place to live. That place was the tomb. In the earliest dynasties, these tombs were not pyramids. They were simple, rectangular, mud brick structures that the Arabs would later call mastabas, which means bench in Arabic, because from a distance, that's what they looked like: low, flat benches scattered across the desert. These mastabas had an underground burial chamber and a chapel above ground where offerings could be left. And for centuries, this was sufficient. But then came a man whose name we still remember, 4,500 years later, Imhotep. Imhotep was not a king. He was a commoner who rose through sheer brilliance to become the chancellor to the pharaoh Djoser. He was a poet, a priest, an astronomer, a physician, and above all, an architect. When Djoser decided he wanted something grander than a mastaba, something that would reflect his divine status and ensure his ascension to the stars, he turned to Imhotep. And Imhotep had an idea. An idea so radical, so unprecedented, that it would change the course of history. He took the traditional mastaba, the bench-shaped tomb, and he stacked another one on top of it. Then another. And another. He built them smaller and smaller as they rose, creating a step-like structure. The result, completed around 2620 BCE, was the step pyramid of Saqqara. It rose 62 meters into the sky, making it the largest structure of its time. It was the world's first large-scale stone building. It was a staircase to the stars, built not for the living, but for the journey of the dead. This was the prototype. This was ancient Egypt's research and development department working in real time. Imhotep's innovation was so profound that he was deified thousands of years after his death. The Greeks identified him with their own god of medicine, Asclepius. He is one of the very few non-royal commoners in history to be worshipped as a god. But the step pyramid, while magnificent, was not a true pyramid. It was a series of steps. The goal, the Holy Grail, was that perfect, smooth-sided shape. The Egyptians associated the pyramid shape with the sun's rays. They believed that the pharaoh, upon death, would ascend those rays to join the sun god Ra in the sky. The smooth sides were not just aesthetic, they were functional. They were the ramp to heaven. And so, the experimentation continued. The next pharaoh, Pharaoh, Khufu's father, was the Great Pyramid builder. He built not one, not two, but 3 pyramids during his reign, and he failed spectacularly along the way. His first attempt was at Mi'atum. It started as a step pyramid, but then they tried to fill in the steps with casing stones to create a true pyramid. It was ambitious, but the design was flawed. The outer casing was built on a foundation of sand, not rock. At some point during construction, or perhaps shortly after completion, the whole thing gave way. The outer layers collapsed into a massive pile of rubble. Today, the Mi'atum pyramid stands as a stark, 3-tiered tower rising from a mountain of its own debris. It is a monument to failure. Undeterred, Pharaoh moved to a site called Dashur. Here, he tried again. This time, they built on solid rock. They started the pyramid at a steep angle of 54 degrees. But as they rose higher, cracks began to appear in the chambers. The weight was too much. The ground, while solid, was unstable in a different way. The architects panicked. They made a decision that saved the pyramid but created one of the strangest looking structures on Earth. They reduced the angle to a shallower 43 degrees halfway up. The result is the bent pyramid. It looks like a rhombus, a weird, crooked monument to a crisis management meeting held 4,500 years ago. But Pharaoh and his architects were not finished. Just a few hundred meters away, they built a third pyramid. This one, the Red Pyramid, gets its name from the reddish hue of its weathered limestone core. They built it at the safe, shallow angle of 43 degrees from the very beginning. It was a success. It stands today as the world's first successful, true, smooth-sided pyramid. These 3 pyramids, the collapse at Mi'atum, the bent pyramid at Dashur, and the Red Pyramid, are the fossil record of evolution. They show us the learning curve. They show us failure, adaptation, and eventual success. By the time Pharaoh died, the Egyptians had mastered the geometry, the engineering, and the geology of pyramid building. The stage was set for his son. His son was Khufu. And Khufu was not a man for second place. Around 2550 BCE, Khufu chose his site. He ignored the locations of his predecessors. He chose a spot several miles north of Dashur, a rocky plateau at a place called Giza. It was a deliberate choice, full of meaning. From Giza, he could look across the Nile to the east, towards the rising sun, and to the west, towards the setting sun and the realm of the dead. But more importantly, the Giza plateau was a geologist's dream. Take a moment and imagine you are Khufu's surveyor. You have been ordered to build a mountain of stone, 481 feet high, covering 13 acres. The first thing you need is bedrock. If the bedrock is weak, or fractured, the entire structure will sink, crack, and collapse under its own immense weight. You need a foundation of solid, uniform rock. The Giza Plateau is exactly that. It is a massive outcropping of nummulitic limestone, a rock formed from the fossilized shells of ancient sea creatures. It is strong, stable, and incredibly durable. The surveyors leveled a circular area of the bedrock to within a fraction of an inch, creating a perfect platform. In some places, they cut channels into the rock and filled them with water to create a perfectly horizontal plane. They then cut away the high spots until the entire foundation was dead level. This precision, this obsession with the horizontal, is the hidden secret of the pyramid's longevity. If the base isn't level, the top will never be true. But the real secret to the pyramid's success wasn't under it. It wasn't even on the plateau. It was a few miles away, a great blue ribbon of life cutting through the desert. The Nile. Without the Nile, the pyramids would be a fantasy. The Nile was Egypt's highway, its source of water, its source of food, and its source of life. In Khufu's time, the climate was slightly wetter than it is today, and the annual inundation, the flood, was a predictable and vital event. Crucially, a now vanished channel, a branch of the Nile that archaeologists call the Khufu branch, brought the water much closer to the Giza Plateau than the river flows today. Some estimates suggest that in 2550 BCE, the water lapped at the very edge of the plateau. Think of it as a superhighway for stone. The Egyptians did not need to invent the wheel for heavy transport. The wheel was known to them, but it was useless in soft sand. What they needed was a boat. And they had the best boats in the ancient world. So, let's talk about the shopping list. What do you need to build the Great Pyramid? You need approximately 2.3 million blocks of stone. The average weight of each block is about 2.5 tons. That's the weight of a large car. But many of the blocks are much heavier. Some of the granite beams in the King's Chamber weigh up to 80 tons. The total weight of the pyramid is approximately 6 million tons. Now, where do you get all that stone? You don't get it from one place. You get it from three. The first source is the easiest. Right there on the Giza Plateau, just south of the pyramid, is a massive quarry. This quarry provided the nummulitic limestone for the core of the pyramid. These are the rough, irregular blocks you see today when you look at the weathered structure. The Egyptians could extract these blocks relatively easily. They would pound grooves into the rock using harder stones called dolerite. Then they would drive wooden wedges into the grooves and soak them with water. As the wood swelled, the force would crack the stone along a clean line. It was simple, low-tech, and brutally effective. A team of quarrymen could extract a block in a matter of hours. But the core stone is ugly. It's rough, it's full of fossils, and it weathers badly. For the outer casing, the skin of the pyramid, Khufu wanted something beautiful. He wanted the pyramid to shine. That stone came from Tura, on the east bank of the Nile. The Tura limestone is a fine-grained, white stone, almost like marble. When it was first quarried, it was soft and easy to cut, but it hardened upon exposure to air. When polished, it would have gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the sun's light so brightly that the pyramid would have been visible from the mountains of the Sinai Peninsula. These casing stones were cut with incredible precision. They were not rectangular blocks, they were trapezoidal, angled to fit together perfectly, creating that smooth, sloping surface. They were fitted so tightly that you cannot slip a piece of paper between them today, even after 4,500 years of earthquakes and stone thieves. And then there is the third source, the most difficult of all. The internal chambers, the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, the plugs in the passageways, and the massive beams that roof the king's chamber itself, these are made of granite. And granite does not come from Giza. It does not come from Tura. It comes from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south, near the first cataract of the Nile. Granite is one of the hardest rocks on earth. It is a nightmare to quarry without iron or steel. How did they do it? They used a method that is almost unbelievable. They would take blocks of even harder stone, like dolerite, and pound the surface of the granite to pulverize it. It was a process of attrition, of sheer repetitive force. It would take weeks to extract a single granite block. Then, they would use another ingenious technique. They would drill holes into the granite along a line, pound in wooden wedges, and soak them. The swelling wood would eventually crack the granite. Or, they would use copper saws, some of which have been found, and pour abrasive sand into the cut. The sand, not the copper, did the cutting. The copper saw just held the sand in place. It was a slow, laborious, and incredibly difficult process. Yet they did it, and they did it on a massive scale. So, you have your workforce. You have your river highway. You have your quarries, both near and far. Now comes the engineering. Now comes the part that has baffled historians for millennia. How do you lift 2.3 million stones, weighing an average of 2.5 tons each, to a height of 481 feet, with a precision that would make a modern architect weep with envy? First, we have to address the labor force again, because the method of moving the stone is intimately tied to who these people were. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing 2,000 years after the fact, claimed that 100,000 slaves built the pyramids, toiling under the whip. This image has stuck in the Western imagination. But archaeology has completely overturned it. In the 1990s, excavations by Dr. Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner uncovered the workers' village at Giza. It is not a slave pen. It is a city. It had dormitories, bakeries, breweries, granaries, and even medical facilities. They found evidence of animal bones, showing that the workers were fed large quantities of beef, mutton, and goat. This was a high-protein diet, the kind of food you need for heavy labor. They were among the best-nourished people of their time. They also found inscriptions, graffiti left by the workers themselves. They wrote the names of their crews. And the names are fantastic. They called themselves things like the drunkards of Menkaure or the friends of Khufu. These are not the names of broken slaves. These are the names of proud men, organized into competitive teams. The current consensus is that the workforce was a rotating force of skilled laborers and conscripted farmers. During the summer months, the Nile flooded, covering the farmland. For 3 or 4 months, the farmers had no work. They were obligated to provide labor to the state, and in return, they were fed, housed, and given a purpose. They worked on the pyramid. When the flood receded, they went home to plant their crops. The core of skilled workers, the quarrymen, the stone cutters, the architects, the overseers, stayed year-round. The total workforce at any one time was probably around 20,000 to 30,000 people, not 100,000. It was a national project, an act of devotion to their God-King, and a massive employment program all rolled into one. So, you have your motivated, well-fed, proud workforce. Now, how do they move the stone? Let's start with the simplest part, the local limestone. These blocks were dragged from the quarry to the pyramid site. They were placed on wooden sledges. In front of the sledge, workers would pour water onto the sand. In 2014, physicists from the University of Amsterdam proved that wetting the sand reduces the friction dramatically. Dry sand piles up in front of the sledge, creating a bow wave of resistance. Wet sand holds its shape, creating a firm, flat track. This simple trick reduced the force needed to pull the sledge by up to 50%. It wasn't magic, it was physics. For the Tura limestone and the Aswan granite, the journey was more complex. They were loaded onto massive barges at their respective quarries. The granite, weighing tens of tons, had to be maneuvered onto these boats. They likely used the same technique as the pyramids themselves. They built a temporary causeway of mud brick, created a basin, and floated the barges underneath the blocks. Then they removed the causeway, and the boat was free. These boats then sailed down the Nile during the flood season, when the water was high and the currents were strong. They navigated the river, turned into the Khufu branch, and docked at the harbor at Giza. From there, the stones were dragged across the causeway to the foot of the pyramid. And this brings us to the greatest debate in Egyptology, the ramp. How do you get a 2.5-ton block of stone to the top of a 480-foot structure? The simplest answer is the straight, external ramp. You build a massive ramp of mud brick, rubble, and gypsum plaster, leading from the quarry to the pyramid face. You drag the stones up it. As the pyramid rises, you raise the ramp. But there is a massive, almost insurmountable problem with this theory. A straight ramp needs to have a gentle slope. If the slope is too steep, you can't drag the stones. A slope of about 1 in 10 is manageable. To reach the top of the Great Pyramid with a 1 in 10 slope, the ramp would need to be nearly a mile long. It would be wider than the pyramid itself. And here's the killer, the volume of material required to build that ramp would be greater than the volume of the pyramid. You would have to build a mountain of rubble just to build your mountain of stone. And then, at the end, you would have to dismantle the ramp and dispose of all that material somewhere. The logistics become absurd. So, perhaps it was a spiral ramp. This theory suggests that a ramp was built around the outside of the pyramid, winding its way to the top like a mountain road. This solves the material problem because the ramp can be narrower and use the pyramid itself as one of its walls. But it creates a different, equally serious problem: you can't see the corners. If the ramp is covering the edges of the pyramid, how do you ensure that the angles are perfect? How do you survey the next course of stone? How do you make sure the pyramid stays square? It would be like building a skyscraper with scaffolding completely covering the corners. You'd have no reference point. A more recent, and increasingly compelling, theory comes from a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin. He has spent decades developing what he calls the internal ramp theory. Houdin's idea is brilliant in its simplicity. He proposes that the builders used a straight, external ramp for the first third of the pyramid. This is the heavy lifting, the massive base. But once the base was complete, they switched to a different method. They built the rest of the pyramid with an internal ramp. This ramp ran inside the pyramid's own structure, just a few meters behind the outer casing. It was a corridor, about 2 meters wide, that spiraled up through the interior. The stones for the upper levels were brought to the foot of the pyramid, dragged up the remaining external ramp to the entrance of the internal ramp, and then hauled up the spiral corridor. This theory solves almost all the problems. It keeps the outer casing free and clear, allowing the surveyors to maintain perfect geometry. It uses the pyramid itself to support the ramp, eliminating the need for a massive external structure. And it explains a strange feature of the Great Pyramid, the notch, a V-shaped indentation on the northeast edge. Houdin believes the notch is where the internal ramp opened to the outside, allowing the stones to be turned. In 2015, as part of the Scan Pyramids project, thermal imaging revealed a mysterious spiral anomaly on the eastern face of the pyramid. Some believe this could be the ghost of Houdin's internal ramp. The theory is not proven, but it is the most elegant and logical explanation we have. But ramps only get the stone to the right height. You still need to get it into its precise position, sometimes within a millimeter of its neighbor. And for that, the Egyptians used the science of leverage. There are paintings in the tomb of Jehudiotep at Bersha that show a colossal statue being pulled on a sledge. In front of the sledge, a man is pouring water onto the sand. But the key detail is what's happening behind the statue. A man is standing with a lever, prying the back of the sledge forward, inch by inch. This was how they maneuvered the blocks into place. Teams of men with copper-tipped wooden levers would rock the block, insert wooden rollers or small stones underneath, and slowly, agonizingly, nudge it into its final resting place. And then there is the question of mortar. The Egyptians used a fine gypsum mortar between the blocks. But it wasn't used as glue, the way we think of cement. It was used as a lubricant. They would spread a thin layer of wet gypsum on the existing course of stone. The block above could slide easily on this wet layer, allowing the workers to maneuver it into place with incredible precision. When the gypsum dried, it hardened and locked the blocks together. It was the perfect solution, a lubricant that became a binding agent. Now, let's go inside. Because the Great Pyramid is not a solid mass of stone. It is a carefully engineered machine, designed to protect the pharaoh's body and facilitate his journey to the stars. The entrance is on the north face, about 55 feet above the ground. From there, a descending passage leads down into the bedrock. It then splits. One passage continues down to an unfinished chamber, likely abandoned. Another ascends into the heart of the pyramid. This ascending passage is one of the most remarkable pieces of engineering in the ancient world. It is a narrow, steep corridor, only about 3 feet 6 inches high and 3 feet 5 inches wide. You have to crouch to climb it. It is lined with massive blocks of stone, fitted so perfectly that they have never shifted. The ascending passage leads to the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery is breathtaking. It is a steep, corbelled vault, 153 feet long and 26 feet high. The walls are made of 7 courses of stone, each one corbelled inward, so the ceiling is narrower than the floor. It is a masterpiece of engineering, designed to distribute the immense weight of the upper pyramid away from the chambers below. At the top of the Grand Gallery is a small, low passage that leads into the king's chamber. The king's chamber is a room built entirely of red granite. It is about 34 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 19 feet high. The walls are made of huge granite blocks, weighing up to 50 tons each. The ceiling is made of 9 massive granite beams, each weighing an estimated 50 to 80 tons. It is an incredibly powerful, stark, and intimidating space. The only object in the room is a large, lidless, granite sarcophagus, too big to have been brought through the entrance after the pyramid was finished. It must have been placed there during construction. But the king's chamber has a secret. Above it, hidden from view, are 5 relieving chambers. The lowest of these has a gabled roof made of enormous limestone beams leaning against each other. These chambers are the reason the king's chamber hasn't collapsed. They act as a stress reliever, distributing the 80 million tons of stone above them away from the ceiling of the chamber below. It is a perfect piece of structural engineering. And from the king's chamber, 2 narrow shafts, about 8 inches square, lead to the outside. They were not for ventilation. They were ritual pathways. One shaft is aligned with the star Thuban, which was the pole star in 2550 BCE. The other is aligned with the stars of Orion's belt, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the dead and rebirth. These shafts were the conduits for the pharaoh's soul, allowing him to travel to the indestructible stars. Below the king's chamber is the queen's chamber, though it was never meant to hold a queen. It is a smaller, unfinished room with a niche in the wall. And below that, deep in the bedrock, is the subterranean chamber, a rough, unfinished room that was abandoned early in construction. The entire internal structure is a masterpiece of planning. The grand gallery, the relieving chambers, the shafts, the plugs, it was all designed to work together. After decades of work, the pyramid was almost complete. The final step was the casing. And here, the Egyptians did something counterintuitive. They did not start at the bottom and work up. They started at the top. They built a platform at the summit, and they placed the first casing stones at the very peak. Then they worked their way down. This allowed them to use the already placed casing stones as a guide for the ones below, ensuring that the entire surface was perfectly smooth and angled. As they worked downwards, they also placed the pyramidion, or capstone. This was often a single piece of solid granite, sometimes covered in electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. When the sun hit that capstone, it would have blazed like a second sun, a beacon visible for miles. When the last stone was placed, the Great Pyramid of Giza was not the weathered, step-like structure we see today. It was a gleaming mountain of light. Its surface was so smooth and so white that it would have reflected the sky, making it appear almost invisible at certain times of day. It was the ultimate expression of a civilization's power, faith, and technological mastery. And then, time passed. Over the millennia, the smooth white casing stones were looted. The Arabs who conquered Egypt in the 7th century AD stripped many of them to build mosques and fortresses in Cairo. You can see the Tura limestone from the pyramids in the walls of Islamic Cairo today. The capstone is long gone. The pyramid was breached, its passages explored, its treasures stolen. It stood silent and wounded for thousands of years. But it never fell. It never collapsed. It endured earthquakes, floods, conquests, and the relentless assault of time. When you look at the pyramids today and see the missing casing stones, the eroded core, the rough appearance, you have to remember something. You are not looking at the finished product. You are looking at the skeleton. The flesh and skin are gone. You are seeing the engineering, not the art. And this leads us back to where we started. Why do we cling to the idea that it was aliens, or giants, or a lost civilization? Why is the truth so hard to accept? Perhaps it's because accepting the truth is even harder to comprehend than the fantasy. The truth is that ordinary human beings, with copper tools and wooden levers, with ropes and sledges and sheer determination, organized themselves into a society capable of achieving the absolute impossible. They did it without supernatural help. They did it without magic. They did it with ingenuity, with sweat, with blood, and with an unshakable belief in something greater than themselves. The pyramids are not a message from the gods. They are not a landing pad for alien spacecraft. They are a message from our own ancestors. They say, look what we can do. Look what we can build. Look what we can achieve when we work together, when we dedicate ourselves to a single purpose for generations. We like to think we are so advanced. We have smartphones and space stations and artificial intelligence. But could we, today, replicate the Great Pyramid? Could we quarry, transport, and lift 2.3 million stones, with that precision, without modern machinery? Could we organize a workforce of 20,000 people for 20 years, feeding them, housing them, keeping them healthy and motivated? Could we build a structure that will last for 4,500 years, that will outlast our own civilization? The answer is, probably not. Not without a reason to. The Egyptians had a reason. They believed that the pharaoh was a living god, and that his survival in the afterlife was essential for the survival of Egypt itself. The pyramid was not just a tomb. It was a cosmic engine. It was the guarantee that the sun would rise, that the Nile would flood, that order would prevail over chaos. That belief is gone. But the pyramid remains. It took centuries of evolution, failure, and hard-won knowledge to build the pyramids. It took the collapse at Mi'atum, the crisis at Dashur, and the triumph at Giza. It took Imhotep, Sneferu, and Khufu. It took millions of hands and billions of man-hours. And it might take us centuries more to fully understand every detail of how they did it. The internal ramp theory, the water lubrication, the stellar alignments, we are still learning. Every year, new scans reveal new anomalies. Every excavation uncovers new tools, new graffiti, new clues. But one thing is certain, and it is the most important thing of all. The mystery is not in how they moved the stones. The mystery is in the human spirit that moved them to try. The mystery is in the audacity to imagine a mountain of stone, perfectly shaped, pointing to the sky. The mystery is in the will to make that imagination real. The pyramids stand today not because of magic, but because of the opposite of magic. They stand because of hard work. They stand because of mathematics. They stand because of hope. So, the next time you see a picture of the Giza Plateau, don't look for aliens. Look for yourself. Look at what you are capable of. Look at the legacy of your own species. And ask yourself, what mountain are we building today? Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into the mysteries of the ancient world, and if you want to join us as we continue to separate fact from fiction, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have more stories to tell, more myths to bust, and more wonders to explore. We'll see you on the next one.